Hey everybody, it's your favorite second monitor slash falling asleep to content back again. We're here to ramble about like 1.5 to 2 hours about nerd shit. Oh, I already said. Oh, I couldn't even last 20 seconds. I'm gonna get demonetized. Oh well. Um, I'm gonna say people, but one guy requested Eurocorps. I don't know if anything else got requested, but I wanna try to go at least until I'm out of it. Blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, red. But there's obviously a lot more blue coalitions slash major nations. So eventually we're gonna have blue, 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 blue. But for now, let's do Eurocorps, a very popular deck, or very popular coalition. Has been meta or close to meta at the very least, basically since its inception. After the release of Yugoslavia and Baltic, I'd argue it was considered to be pretty weak. But that is because, at least from my perception of like other top players and high ranked, high ranked tournaments, etc., for a while not considered very good. But then people just started figuring out, hey, the new, in quotes, new AMX-10 is actually really busted, and other stuff like that. People started to come around to Tiger. I was. And when it comes to all of this, right, realizing how strong Eurocorps is, I was very late on the Eurocorps is actually really strong train, right? I was one of the it took me I was one of the last believers in this deck. I fully admit that, right? I was not on board with people saying it was meta. But yeah, turns out AMX-10 was really busted. Turns out the Tiger Stealth was really busted. Yeah. Of course, it got nerfed ever since, both in the South Africa and in the Italy patch. Still very strong. Still has some very strong key units. And we're gonna go over that. Logistics. It's a pretty solid logistics set, right? You have your infantry CVs. Panther is always like nice enough, right? Rocket pod helicopter, Panther. One of the two blue for. Wait, now that I'm thinking about it, not only, if I remember correctly, are Lynx, the Lynx H7 and the Panther, the only blue for rocket pod transports available for CVs. They're just straight up the only blue for rocket pod transports, period, right? Like in Island Battle, you used to get the Huey, the Heavy Hawk or whatever, as a transport as well, if I remember correctly. Not in Red Dragon anymore, so yeah. I mean, that is always a nice option. Even the VAP T20 is honestly fine, or the Fuchs Milan. Or just a basic VAP slash Fuchs if you want to get a ground transport. What it lacks is like a 4 per card. I guess it has the M577. Never mind. It even has like a 4 per card, somewhat armored CV if you want that, right? If you run a 3 CV setup, you could run something like this, for example. Leopard 2 is a pretty solid heavy, quote, heavy tank CV. Heavy when it comes to other tank CVs, not tanks in general. It is, well, one of the only 3 blue. No, the Merkava tank CV also exists, right? Either way, 70k mage off-road speed is very good for tank CV. Speed is basically, in a way, almost the most important stat because you generally can expect some decent armor on your CVs. It doesn't have the best side armor though. 6 is not a lot. 3 top armor is pretty standard. I don't think there's any tank CV with more than that, or any CV period. Yeah, it's a fine tank CV. Nothing crazy about it. It's just very, very solid. And you have even a more affordable available. You also have the AMX-30B, and I think that is a good entry point. Look at my segue. It's showcasing the AMX-30 Autocannon. Yeah. So, I think most people know, but I'm gonna just show it either way, and then the counterpart is gonna be the West German Kyler. So, on the unit card, right, you can obviously see it as an autocannon there. In fact, it's even the same autocannon as on the VAP T20, which in fact is actually a pretty solid autocannon. basically 100 RPM. Like the true rate of fire is 100 RPM, which is the highest rate of fire you really get on any ground-based autocannon, at least ones with AP. So that's very good. It doesn't have the range, of course, or the accuracy, but 100 RPM very often make up for that. So yeah, in some situations, consider arguably like the best autocannon. If we ignore the fact that there's also a later version with 30% accuracy, but you generally don't get that on very cheap units. Either way, it's a solid autocannon, alright? But as most people, or many people at the very least, hopefully know, the issue with the AMX line and their autocannons is that's a coaxial autocannon. And in Wargame, coaxial means it can't fire simultaneously with, well, the other gun on that axis, so to speak. Another example, for example, would be the BMP-T or BMP-3, who can't fire their autocannon and high explosive gun at the same time. There's also some other units like that, like anti-air units, like the Tunguska not being able to fire a gun and missile at the same time, for example. Or, you know, an everyday thing. Your rifle infantry cannot fire an anti-tank weapon and MG at the same time. Mechanically speaking, from the game, that is the exact same thing happening here, right? The game doesn't calculate anything like, oh, would the high explosive gun at that distance, at this angle, be able to hit the target while the autocannon would as well, right? Because surely there's going to be some overlap where, realistically speaking, at some point both targets, or both guns, even if they're coaxial, would hit the same. Either way, let's not get tactical here. It's very similar, right? And Wargame basically just says, if X fires, Y can't fire as well, right? And then it basically depends, alright, which weapon fired first, that weapon will keep firing, as long as it can, basically, right? Meaning, if the AMX-30 engages an aerial target first, it will keep shooting with the autocannon, I'm pretty sure at least, until that aerial target, or helicopter specifically, is out of range or dead. In which case, then it will only fire the first available target with the main gun, and vice versa. In the armory tool, in case you're wondering, you see here turret 0, right? Well, it starts counting at 0, right? If it has the same turret number, it can't fire at the same time. Another very, very obvious example in this case, if we're looking at that. Heat and high explosive, or AoE, is on the same turret, because it's technically the same gun and all that. And then at the autocannon, we still see turret 0. And only once we switch to the MG, we see a specific or a separate turret, right? If we look at the Brennes, same story. Oh, you can't see the drop-down menu here, interesting, but there's a drop-down menu of the weapons. See the F1s and the autocannons at the same turret, and then the NF1 again isn't. Difference here is the Kyler, which L44 turret 0, and then HSO2 turret 1. You can also just straight up look at the model, of course, right? I'm pretty sure the autocannon is supposed to be this thing here. That thing poking out there. It's the autocannon. Yeah, usually that is a decent indicator. And then the MG here on top has a separate turret, right? You can even see it rotate on its own. So yeah, that's the issue with all the French tanks with their autocannon. Be aware of that. That doesn't mean it's useless. Right? It obviously means it can defend itself against helicopters, actually significantly better than most other tanks, unless we're talking about Igla tanks. Which means that it is mainly a thing for the French CV, not so much for the tank, like the tank tab, where it probably doesn't matter. And technically, right, you could, if you're really nerding out, micro your gun so that once you fired your main gun, you turn it off, fire a burst with the autocannon, then turn your main gun back on. The only problem here is what you have to keep in mind is that you have to re-aim with the weapons each and every time. So practically, you can't really shoot with the autocannon very, very long, because if you want to take the aim time into consideration, you don't have a lot of like actual firing time with the autocannon until your main gun is ready again. And of course, the autocannon actually at certain ranges has a higher DPS than the main gun. But of course, at the same time, French tanks are not very well armored for your price. So, excuse me, it really kind of goes against the entire like autocannon thing. In Wargame, at least. You know, I don't know what their thing was in real life, how useful it was. Surely not that much, given that no other tank like Leclerc doesn't have it anymore. But yeah, in Wargame, on the tank tab variants, it's pretty much a nothing burger. Every now and then, you're gonna be like, oh, that's neat. I just was able to kill that helicopter that otherwise might have survived, or something like that. Practically speaking, though, you can basically ignore it. Again, on the CV, though, maybe not so much, because CVs are often alone on their own. And being able to kill an incoming helicopter or deal more damage to it in the same time, not irrelevant by any means. And especially when you're hiding in a deep forest, basically only gonna shoot at distances of 400, 500 meters, so the accuracy is gonna be much, much higher, right? Helps quite a bit. So the main, excuse me again, the main counterpart, of course, would be the Leopard 1. And honestly, usually I've always run a Leopard 1 if I run out of those. These days, I think the AMX-30 is actually better. Again, usually the one top armor mostly matters against clusters, but at the same time, when you're using it at a frontline CV and the opponent is mortar spamming, not unusual that you're actually gonna get hit up on top with artillery, right? Because usually artillery hits you at like front or side or maybe rear. Front against high explosive artillery, 6 versus 8 is pretty much whatever. And then 3 side armor, 2 rear armor are the same. The top armor is the biggest difference here. And you're also 15 points cheaper. Like you could, for example, instead of running like this setup, also just replace a 577 with an AMX-30 instead of 9 CVs, right? And at like not mainline front CVs, this is still like pretty survivable for what it does. So I think I've underrated it quite a bit in the past, and I've been like saying, "Oh my god, why is that idiot using the AMX-30 CV?" But you know what? I'm sorry, I wasn't familiar with the game. It's a pretty solid CV, honestly. And the rest are pretty, you know, whatever, one armor, APCs, jeeps, supply stuff. Yep, and a helicopter CV. All right, infantry. Let me also get this off. I'm sorry again. Milans, they're all fine, right? I think. No, we haven't gone over them. Yeah, Milans are all fine. Milan 1, the spam one. Milan 2 is like has good availability while still having solid killing power. Then a Milan 3 is 6 per card, but 26 AP is quite a lot. You double tap 18 armor, right? You one shot up to 12 armor. Very, very powerful. But at the same time, they're all Milans. And if you've played for a while, you know that Milans always miss, unless they're your opponent's Milans, or you don't need them to hit, really. Like when that thing shoots at a 5-pointer or something. No, but all jokes aside, they're all good. There's various possibilities to run them as well. Milan 3, of course, you'd probably want in a VAM, right? More expensive ATGM infantry, I would usually not suggest running in a Panther. You know, obviously there's always exceptions, like you're building a deck for a certain map and you need a certain strategy and you want them to healer drop like aggressively in the opener or something like that. Obviously that's fine. When, let's say, you're using them in a quote-unquote normal way, by normal I mean like you're putting them in for like a general purpose deck, I would always suggest putting them in a ground transport, because throughout the game, in the mid game and late game, getting them to the front line in the Panther is very annoying, because it's very gets spotted very far and can easily get killed by Crotal sniping them from very far away, for example, right? Obviously, what you can also do is just unload them near the spawn and load them into one of your VABs that you have left over. Perfectly fine, of course. I personally would still generally suggest running them in a VAB. That said, of course, if you want a Panther and you don't really have any other squads in your deck that could run that helicopter, it might still very much be worth it, just with a couple of Panthers around throughout the game. Panthers are always good. But unless you need them specifically for that, I would still suggest running them in a VAB. Other Milans is of course slightly different. They're cheaper, so even if you just want the Panther, it's not as big of a deal, and you know, you get more of them per card, so losing one aggressively is still bad, of course, in terms of units you lost, but in the case of the Milan 1, of course, it's much, much cheaper. Another funny thing to do is honestly spamming the Milan 1 with a VAP T20. VAP T20 is a very solid APC. Of course, it only has 1 armor and a, let's say, close range autocannon, which doesn't really work that well, but when you spam them, when you have plenty of them around, very, very useful to have. Or in a 5-pointer, of course. In general, Eurocorps, I'd probably run a Milan 2 or Milan 3, depending on how I feel like. Milan 2 and a VAP T20 is always good. That said, you only get 3 cards of them, so might not be able to actually get your T20 with them. Because you definitely want 1 card, honestly, and personally speaking, I run 2 cards of them always with different squads. So I've basically only 1 card available for squads that aren't those 2 units. Chasseur are probably the worst, the transports, line infantry in the game. SMG is horrible line infantry. The MG is basic MG you can get, right? It can barely get worse. And the anti-tank weapon is probably the worst anti-tank weapon you can have on a squad like that. There is the super bazooka on the Fanteria di Linea, the base ones, the Italian line infantry, which is also really, really bad. But it has quite high suppression because of its very high caliber, whereas the LRAC-73 doesn't. It also has less range. That said, both weapons basically only fire in other stuff when they're in the forest. So whether they have 455 or 525 meters range doesn't really matter, with the exception of range scaling giving you a bit extra accuracy, of course. And despite the extra range that the Super Bazooka has, I think it has a base accuracy of 30%. The LRAC still has effectively higher accuracy in forests, right? The 70 meters do not make up for 10%. And I believe the Super Bazooka also only has 13 AP, although 13 versus 14 doesn't matter a whole lot. Every now and then it might matter if you're like side-shotting something, or if you're fighting against a CV90 that has 6 armor, in which case these guys will double tap and the Super Bazooka won't. But all that yapping aside, pretty much in every category, like primary, secondary, and tertiary weapon, they have the worst, like one of the worst, if not the worst possible weapons. I mean, technically, even the SMG could be worse if you look at the like Nostovaki or something, but practically speaking, they have horrible weaponry, and the model even still carries the same weapons that the Reservistas have, right? The MAS 49, and the huge never fixed that. Either way, they're really horrible line infantry, but they have some decent transports. If you want to spam line infantry, AMX-30 is a very good option. Although, personally, if you're spamming AMX-13, it's probably better to go for Reservistas. Simply because Chasseurs are just so impotent. Like, base riflemen at least are fine, right? The law is decent for forests. It has at least 20 RPM. They have an assault rifle at the very least as the primary, right? But Chasseurs are just... Ugh. So... Honestly, the main reason to run Chasseur if you want to spend the T20 or the AMX-10P at a very low cost and high availability, and the 10 HP squad also means that in forests you have decent meat shields for these vehicles, right? So those are the only 2 options where I would consider running base Chasseur, practically speaking. In Eurocorps Unspec, I don't think you want to run this. It's hard to afford, I'd argue. Unless you want to skip it like ATGM squads, but I wouldn't suggest doing that. Yeah, but in Moto, for example, or this in Mech, fine, decent options. By no means bad. The 35 are a bit... they're like not very good for like a 15-point line infantry squad, but they'd also be too good for 10 points. They also are very awkward. I don't think they have like a real role. Like in something like... Maybe in Eurocorps Moto, if you want like a somewhat affordable, reasonable anti-tank weapon, you might want to run this. But then you're only 5 points away from running like base Legion, right? That are shock. They're not like they're amazing, but for 5 points in a Moto deck where you have to pay 25 points at the very least anyway, you know. And then in Mech, you probably might run just Deckungsgruppe instead. So they're not outright horrible, and every now and then you see them run in 5-pointer. If you want to run like some spam infantry that is not useless, like where the infantry itself is not useless, that can be an okay option. They're not very cheap, but at the same time you have a bunch of LRAC F1s around, which is also not bad at all, right? So while you give up the spam ability, you get a lot more value out of your spam. So they can be, in my opinion, an okay option to run as your spam infantry squad, which you want to do if you have like as good of a 5-motor available as the French have. It's probably not the optimal choice, but I think it's a valid choice. And the other transports, I mean, it can still be like okay in the AMX-30 or the VAP-T20 in certain decks. It's by no means a bad card. It's just, to me at least, hard to justify when you have other options available, right? Like for spamming Reservistas, or maybe even these guys, it's not like they're a bad card to spam if you just want to spam, but Reservistas basically does the same thing. And if you want some, let's say, affordable, acceptable AT, even have base Legion or something, or Deckungsgruppe, right? So, hard to justify. Commander Marines, they're nothing outright crazy. They have a Carbine, which is a decent primary. Aragafon is okay, and a basic MG. They do get a Panther, and some basic French wheeled options. So usually you see a card of them in Moto, like as an individual 15 HP elite squad is always like on flanks and such in deep forests, like for example, hard to get rid of. They're solid for town fighting thanks to their HP. Especially in deep town fights, right? There's only so many squads that will always fight each other because of line of sight blocks, and fire support is much harder to utilize. That's one of the things where the HP really starts to matter, especially on elite squads. Being able to get them out alive again is very, very good. And yeah, unlike Commandosi though, they have some acceptable AT weapon, so they're good in that regard. Yeah, every now and then you see them in unspec. You usually see a card in Moto, either in the VAB or in the Panther. Yeah. Deckungsgruppe. They're your usual Kalgus of Fist Squad, really, just like the Scandies have. But they have the Martyr line available. The Martyr 1 line, at least. They had the Martyr 2 for a single patch. I don't remember if it was a live patch or like a beta patch. I think it didn't make it into the public wargame build. I don't fully remember. It's been like quite literally about 10 years. I think it was in 2015 where the Martyr 2, Patriot, etc. got added, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, did they get added? Did they get added? No, I think it was still in 2014. I'm pretty sure they got added before the Scandi DLC. And the Scandi DLC got added like late 2014 and I think went live in early 2015. You could enter the Scandi beta via the Steam options. And the reason why I remember that, or the fact that it happened before, is because in the Scandi DLC, Anzac also got one unit in form of the Vickers, because in the like a mini patch / free DLC that where the Martyr 2 got added, Patriot got added, stuff like that, Anzac got like the M113 Milan in the vehicle type, which was basically just an insult. So to make up for it, they got the Vickers with the Scania DLC, which means that the Martyr 2 DLC came out before, ergo in 2014. So it's been 11 years actually. Either way, it would be a ridiculously strong card if they did get the Martyr 2. So it's good that they don't. But if you see them, usually with the Martyr 1, sometimes I think with the folks in Moto, but 7 cards in Moto, it might sound like they seem easier to fit in, but actually I feel like they're harder to fit in Moto than in Unspec. It's might sound a bit weird, maybe it's just me, but either way. It's a pretty solid card. It's also just very squishy, right? Depending on the deck and the situations, you might buy them and they instantly die, right? 5 HP only. But it's still like a very nice combination. Deck control to deal with vehicles, Martyr 1 to deal with infantry. Can be very, very strong, especially if you combine it with other spam. In fact, just recently, I played against Eurocorps Moto, Mech, with that, where I lost against, I think Mesrin it was, who ran this. You don't see it very often, but I think it's a pretty strong card. Maybe I'll run some Eurocorps Mech myself in the future. It seems like a very fun deck. Fallschirmjäger 90. Base Fallschirmjäger are actually pretty solid. Like for town grinding and stuff. You'd still rather have the Commander Marines, honestly, if you want like specifically a town grinding infantry or even like an all-purpose. I don't think there's any reason to choose Fallschirmjäger over Commander Marines. Yes, Fallschirmjäger have SMGs, which would be better in towns, I think. Carbines, I think, also only get Stabilizer and CQC bonus. CQC bonus is... actually, let's look it up. But either way, right, the 533 RPM is... hello, Commando? Oh, there's a hyphen there, okay. CQC weapon is Where's the accuracy? 80%. Oh, they get the SMG accuracy and CQC as well, but they still don't have the 533 RPM. So I think pure DPS wise, Fallschirmjäger should still have the edge, especially because they've one of the second best MG in the game, basically. But of course, for one, they're only 10 HP, which the more expensive your squad gets, right, the less extra percentage-wise you basically have to pay for extra HP. Because pretty much the extra HP is almost always costs essentially 5 points, right? Any comparable squad with 10 HP usually costs 5 points less. And when you pay like 30 versus 35, not even counting the transport, it's much, much lower, of course, than 10 to 15 when it comes to the percentage, right? So paying 5 points for 5 HP here is a lot more valuable, especially because getting your squad out alive after fighting is much easier with elite squads, because they're much faster and resilient to suppression and all that. And the Panzerfaust 44, it's not horrible. It can at least one-shot 2 armor, but like for 30 points, it really lacks, right? So when you have the choice between the two, there's no real reason to run Fallschirmjäger. Fallschirmjäger 90, of course, so are a somewhat different story. I still would say that, and it hurts a bit to say this, right? Because obviously I'm German, I'm rooting for the Germans. But I think generally speaking, Commander Marines probably are, or add more to the deck than a Fallschirmjäger 90 squad. Fallschirmjäger 90 has, of course, well, maybe not of course, but it does have higher DPS. It does have a 24 AP and a tank weapon, right? But usually, Panzerfaust 3 you don't really lack, because you will almost certainly run Legion 90, or at least you should. So, you know, in non-mech decks. In mech, of course, you get Fallschirmjäger 90, maybe then they're a better choice. But we're talking about general deck here. And the popular decks, being Moto. You usually have your AT front covered, which means that the other main purpose would be killing infantry, especially in towns, right? Because in forests, and especially in the open, there's always fire support involved, and you wanna, unless they're low intensity engagements, usually not, or unless they fulfill other purposes as well, they're usually not want to rely on as special forces at the very least. Either way, so, and in that regard, Commander Marines, yes, they are still weaker, but Commander Marines will still absolutely destroy anything that isn't an elite squad. And even in one-on-one, I don't know, I genuinely don't know if they might still not come out on top because of the extra HP. And that is not even like taking into account, right, the situations where your squad is just getting shot without getting shot back or something, right? It gets spotted and shot at by fire support, or it revealed itself briefly shooting with the anti-tank weapon, and then the rocket pod fires at it, blah blah blah. All these extra things means there will be situations where the Command Marines will get out alive and the Fallschirmjäger won't, right? There's a difference between having a 35 point squad and losing one. And yeah, meaning, usually I'd argue Commander Marines do have a more value. However, that is not me saying Fallschirmjäger 90 are a horrible choice by any means. They are certainly not a bad squad, right? There's plenty of decks that would love to have this squad, and in some decks they would much rather have Fallschirmjäger 90 than Commander Marines, of course, right? It's it always depends a bit on what is in the rest of the deck. And also depends on how you use the squad, right? Maybe your playstyle or your strategy still works a lot better with Fallschirmjäger 90. But I'm not saying there's like always like a straight up better answer. I'm just saying that I'd argue the Commander Marines in your average Eurocorps deck has a slight edge over the Fallschirmjäger 90 when it comes to how useful they are. But Fallschirmjäger 90 are, of course, beloved by many people with their space magic gun, right? That used to have, by the way, 80% accuracy with this. They have SMG rate of fire, assault rifle range, assault rifle accuracy, and carbine and stabilizer, and I'm pretty sure they probably have like 80% secrecy stats. Oh no, they don't actually. Okay, but still, the best primary weapon in the game, bar none, right? Just straight up the best. One of the best anti-tank weapons in the game, second best MG, and yet I'd still argue that Commander Marines are probably on average the better choice. But again, I want to stress this: that doesn't mean they're a bad choice, or that you're making your deck much, much weaker if you run them instead of the Commander Marines, right? It's a really like 99% strength Eurocorps versus 98% strength Eurocorps kind of deal, okay? Fliegerfaust, I mean, they're a horrible man pet. Not much else to say. Fliegerfaust 2 are Stinger C. Very solid. Usually run the Mistral though. But if you don't, if for some reason the Mistral is so expensive or something, Fliegerfaust is fine. Fliegerfaust 2, I should say. They have the same availability though. So even though they're cheaper, they have the same availability. Keep that in mind. Hammerschützen, they're an okay spam squad, but because their 5-pointer only has 1 armor and no 50 cal either, I'd always go for the Reservistas. They have 4 reserves, one of the best anti-tank weapons in the game, with the Blindicide, Blindicide, Blindicide. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. 14 AP is pretty solid. 50% accuracy is pretty solid. So yeah, and a battle rifle, which is actually kind of solid. So, you know, while they're calm, they might actually hit something. That said, because their main role is usually to get shot at and die, the 5-pointer carries more weight. Although with the Italy patch, these guys have a somewhat lower availability, so you know they are still a consideration. How the Mighty have fallen. They used to be like the infantry squad, and then plus 5 points happened, and they weren't anymore. There's of course a lot more stuff in between. They also didn't always have 16 AP, for example, or 700 meters range. But MG3 and Battle Rifle make a very strong combination, but with 16 AP at 700 meters range, they were just a bit too good at 10 points. And there were some discussions, both I think during South Africa and Italy, whether they might not actually be kind of acceptable at 10 points, given the fact that transports are pretty meh. Right? If you look at like all the meta squads, right? Mechanisovana in a PvP is ridiculously good, right? All the 5-point spam with like 2 and 3 front armor and the 50 cal and stuff like that, right? But at the same time, it's not like Eurocorps or any of the other West German decks really needed a squad like this at 10 points in order to suddenly like they were like the decks were underpowered and they needed that squad. So that thought was really discarded relatively quickly. Of course, I think the problem is also, I think, I know I just said I think twice, and I started sentences 5 times without saying anything of value. It would be nice to slightly buff the squad so they're actually worth 15 points, but how would you want to do that? Yeah, who knows. Though as far as I know, technically speaking, Jager should actually be shock squads and Panzergrenadier should be line squads. If you're talking about realism, but it's also like a whole different kind of worms, right? Imagine line squad suddenly spammed in Mortar 2. Legion. I think the only time they really played is if you're playing like France Modo, where you might have like an extra slot left over. But yeah, like for 5 points, it's one of the best 5-point upgrades of any infantry squad in the game, I think. You get the best MG, you get arguably the best infantry-based AT weapon. It's of course a bit like depending on what you're looking for. Like obviously there are situations where there are other ones that are better, right? Straight up. Like technically, if you're getting spammed at 1 armor transport in forest, an M72 law base would be better, right? But like you could maybe argue that like an AT-12T used by the Costiera 90 is in more than just 1 or 2 niche situations better, right? With the 20 RPM. Or that the recorded rifle will give you more, but I'd argue that on average the RX is probably, well, okay, the boom bar is better used by the Pato Branzi because it's basically the same with 1 more AP. But after that is probably the second best infantry based AT that you could get on a 10-man rifle squad, right? Not to say that, you know, others aren't very, very good either, but I think the RX is like very much up there. Huge AP, good accuracy. It is guided, which every now and then will be annoying, and sometimes you will lose line of sight in flight, despite it being a very, very fast missile. But still, it's a crazy good anti-tank weapon to have, especially on a shock squad that is rather affordable, and you get 12 of them in the right transport. One of the best infantry squads, period, in the game, and there's definitely an argument you could be made for those to be 30 points and the fast keeping a 90 to be 35. But I think some people are not ready for the discussion yet. But yeah, one of the straight up a must take, right? There's just no reason you shouldn't take this squad when you have it available. It is just so good. Mistral, one of the best, maybe even the best manpad in the game, right? 26, 25 meters range, 60% accuracy, 5 HE. It does only have good stealth instead of very good, like 2 HP manpads. But on manpads, that is much less of an issue than on, excuse me, and at ATGM teams. But if you have this space or you want a manpad, probably the best to take. Usually in a VAB T20 is a good combination. It gives like some extra firepower to protect them against 5-pointers or something. Yeah. Milan 1, Milan 2 again. If you run a Milan 2 or Milan 1, the other options, of course, instead of the French one, to take the German one for the Fuchs Milan. Very popular option as well. Especially with Milan 2 in a Milan. Yeah, I think if you run a Milan 2, running them in the Fuchs Milan is probably the best option as opposed to the French Milan 2. Milan 1, 5-pointer, or Fuchs Milan, or AMX-30 or something. All fine. Panzergrenadier. You don't see them very often. Sometimes you see them with like the Mortar 1 line, right? They're okay in combination with the Mortar 1, right? The shock squad itself is still very strong against infantry. It will struggle against vehicles, and the difference between a Panzerfaust 44 at 16 AP and like a Carl Gustav at 18 AP is relatively noticeable. It is obviously not as big of a deal as like the difference between this and a Panzerfaust 3, but you still notice it. So you see them pretty rarely. It's still an okay option, and in Mech you have the slots. Sometimes again you might see it in unspec, or even in a 5-pointer. If you want like more grindy count grinders, right, per card, they're also a good option in a 5-pointer, right? 25 points for a shock squad with MG3 and a battle rifle is pretty strong. But the other problem here again is a 5-pointer only 1 armor means that 1 AMX-30 and you instantly popped, or a 20 AP gun shoots at you and the entire squad inside dies, whereas against a 2 armor transport, you'd survive with 8 HP. In that scenario, you might still be a sitting duck and die, but your opponent will at least have to shoot at you, and you still have at least a chance to run away and stuff like that. That is a bit annoying, which is why Mortar 2 for 15 points, by the way, incredibly good IFV, 4 front armor and good speed, and a strong autocannon. It's a very good IFV. And I didn't talk about it, by the way, but the AMX-30 has the same gun and has 3 armor. Right? 3 front armor is also pretty solid. It's basically like BVP without the autocannon, without a missile, but extra side armor, which is not to be ignored. So that this is an option. Mortar 1A2 onwards has a 30% version of the autocannon, which is why sometimes you see them with the Mortar 1A2. Even 75 kmh, and the 1A3 has 5 armor even. It's a bit slower than. The entire line is actually pretty solid. Although I guess if you want you should probably run the 1A2 instead of the 1A1, unless you really value availability. But they're all okay options. You don't see them very often. It's not because they're not great, but they are options. 90s variant, of course, very good. Panzerfaust 3, very good AT weapon. And the Mortar 2, of course, in both scenarios, very strong. But if you're on the Mortar 2, you probably want to go for the 90s version. Might as well, right? Like 55 versus 60 points, whoop-de-doo. But you get a much, much better anti-tank weapon. Unless, like, you're playing like a mech deck or something and you need 2 cards of Panzerfaust 3 squads to be relatively cheap, then, a card of the base ones in the Mortar 2 is also fine. If you mainly care about the Mortar 2. It's not like this is a bad card, right? It's just the more expensive you get, the less reason there is to take the base ones over the 90s ones. Because Vistas is one of the best spam infantry in the game for meat shields. 10 HP squad for 5 points and a 5-point transport with a 50 cal and 3 front 2 side armor and a good speed. Not much more you can ask for. Rima are okay, I was gonna say basically worse Legion. But keep in mind that Legion are light infantry, and thus have the extra 5 kmh of speed. Whereas the Rima have a battle rifle, which is actually better than an assault rifle. That said, again, there's no real reason for them to take them, and no real reason to take them. And then Rima 85, get a mini as well, like the Legion 90. And instead of the Erics, you get the Upglass, And of course, you also lack the 5 kmh of light infantry speed. Sometimes you actually see them run on top of Legion 90, and this is still a very good squad. If Legion 90 didn't exist, Eurocorps would always run this, I think. It's a very good squad. You don't see that often simply because usually it's not that often that you see them run on top of Legion 90. Plus, they don't come in Moto, which is the other main deck where Legion 90 are being run, and thus, you would only ever play them in the same deck if you're playing unspec, and then, one of your 5 valuable infantry squads, tough to consider. And then Superf, if you need flamers, like in mech, you might want to run them for town fighting instead of something like Panzergrenadier, especially because the 5-pointer is better. In Moto, probably not big of a reason because you have good shock and good elite squads that can town fight very well. Support. AMX-30s are pretty fun, right? One thing you have to consider is the lower HE you have, the lower your aim time. For non-smoke. All smoke for mortars is 4 seconds, I believe. But look at this, 4 seconds aim time versus 8 seconds. Which means that not only do they come out after firing much faster, because of their much lower maximum range, which is still like a downside, but you're forced to have them much closer to the front line. So with lower aim time and lower travel time, they will arrive at where you want them to fire very, very fast. They're also very accurate. So if we have a lot of infantry fights, and especially if those infantry fights actually take relatively long because both of you are spamming line infantry or reservists or something like that, that is where these will be really good fire support. And I think many people underestimate them for that. In general, fire support, mortars are very, very strong, and people still don't spam them as much as they maybe should, including me, but I still keep saying it at the very least. But that's just actually very fun. So you probably still are not going to run them because if you need smoke to make much smaller smoke clouds, and that's where the range is also a big deal, of course. So you can don't need to drive them up if your tank is driving around or something, or you need some smoke to smoke a town or something on the other side of the map. So that is where that is their biggest downside. But when it comes to AC fire support, they're actually pretty solid. BPM 120. Basically a 5 HE high-end mortar, and because it's French, actually gets an aim time of 6 seconds as opposed to 8, which almost all other 5 HE mortars get. It's also very accurate, but it's also very expensive. The other thing to keep in mind. Yeah, it's actually pretty good. Also, like a very good fire support mortar, and can, because it does have the range, actually provide smoke much better. So that is an option, but it's also 60 points, right? That is something to keep in mind. But it's fine for that. AMX-30 it's a solid spam artillery, like the M108, the ANZAC M108 or the Japanese 108 that I like to run. It has probably 20 seconds aim. It does have 20 seconds aim time, as opposed to 30, which most other non-high-end artillery pieces have. So that is nice. It's solid, and again, I said it in the first video, I think the 5 HE on howitzers is much bigger than the 5 HE on mortars. Their AoE is much, much larger. Okay? Keep that in mind. The AF1 just does not really have a purpose, unless maybe you're playing armored or something, but then you get the M270. It's a 30 seconds aim time howitzer. There's like good accuracy and such, right? But 30 seconds just makes these howitzers, unless they're like an M110, just very meh. Like, it's not bad per se, and like, if the 10 second aim time howitzers wouldn't exist, you would see this a lot more often, because there's still artillery, and most artillery is better. Like, having any artillery is almost always better than having no artillery. It's just depends on when you buy it, right? But it's just, yeah, not that great. Although I think it should actually have some pretty sick rate of fire. If I'm not mistaken, it has some pretty fancy autoloader, some system going on that makes it actually deserve having a, let's say, special rate of fire, not just your basic, oh, I fire every 7 seconds for 6 shots, or something like that, right? But I'm not an expert on that. El Noir is actually pretty funny. Oh, pretty fun. 2 armor is actually nice and helps against rocket pods. It is 35 points, has solid range, has a solid rate of fire. It's a pivot rate of fire, right? Less accuracy, but it's also 5 points cheaper. Yeah, it doesn't have the aim time of a pivot either, unfortunately. But it's actually kind of fine. In mech, so you see it sometimes. Other than that, probably not that much. But it's fine. The base Roland. This is where the two-tube nature of the Roland really is annoying. We don't even remotely notice it or get punished by it as much on the radar Rolands, but because this is a more anti-helicopter focused Roland, you have to reload for 10 seconds after every 2 missiles. Which means that if this guy engages an mine MTV and misses even just one of its missiles, it will probably die. And that's not good. And then, because you need 2 missiles to hit in order to kill most helicopters, that becomes a problem. You see where I'm getting at? Yeah. It's like, just on paper, it really isn't horrible. It's non-radar, has solid range, good amount of missiles, good availability, good mobility, and even armor, right? But it just... it doesn't do its anti-helicopter role very well. Which even in mech, where or armored, where you don't get a Crotal, you don't really see that often as a result. Over the years, many people is maybe an exaggeration, but on the forums, sometimes people have asked Eugen to like massively increase the reload time of the Roland, because compared to other systems, supposedly they can actually swap to the next set of two missiles very, very fast. Like they drop them and just pick them up from below. Like there's like on each side, I think there's like a cabin, so to speak, for the next set of missiles. So they just let them go and then load them back in, it looks pretty sick. But for better or for worse, and honestly, maybe for better, I don't know. They just stuck or kept it with the default system, which is every salvo reload is 5 seconds times the amount of missiles per salvo. Either way, yeah, it's a bit of a shame, maybe. But Roland 3, both the German and the French one, just very good. They're not like incredibly fancy, but like 65% base accuracy is ridiculously good. Against plane spam, the having only 2 missiles at the ready will also sometimes come into play, but it's not as big of a deal. Or when they themselves have to engage helicopters because of the same range, it might come into effect. But with much better base accuracy and 6 HE against 6 HP helicopters, you can at least one-shot those. Yeah, they're very good anti-plane units. The only time where they struggle is against like A10s or 2 armor planes, right? Because they only quote unquote only have 6 HE. And you have to still keep them somewhat close to the front line because they don't have the range of like a Hawk or a Pokemon 1 or something, right? But they have mobility and armor, or some armor at least, to make up for that. I'd prefer the Ronin 3, thanks to its off-road speed and the top armor against clusters at the very least. Then again, you lose rear armor. And the front armor, however, on the Ronin 3 then helps against rocket pods, right? Where the HE reduction is a good chunk better. But both very good. Cesar is a very good 10 seconds aim time artillery. Just keep in mind, no armor, so counter battery will be very, very deadly. And you definitely want to run a FOB with it because it only comes with 18 shots. Some artillery, like the Thunder, come with so many shots that you can't definitely consider running a strategy where you don't even run a FOB with that. But with the Cesar, you definitely want it. But it's relatively basic, has a solid firing pattern as well. And of course, 10 seconds aim time. Total is one of the most busted anti-air units in the game, I'd argue. Maybe not on par with like a automatic, or at the very least a pre-Italy automatic, but one of the like straight up best AA pieces in the game. Non-radar, very good range, and given the fact that this non-radar, it has very good range against planes as well. Very good accuracy, wheeled, 6 per car downweighted, very good, very good AA piece. Kind of a must-have, honestly. There's honestly some people I think just run this as their AA setup, which has some, sometimes you might come into trouble because you're lacking certain stuff. But at the same time, it's just also very, very easy to use. You just gotta keep in mind to resupply them relatively regularly. But incredibly good AAPs. Leopards, they're all good. Like, it really depends on what you want. Do you want it affordable and spammable? Do you want like a single one to basically be able to solo any plane, at least provided they come close enough? Yeah. Any kind of flavors in here. And the base one and the A1 also have very good availability, so you could definitely upbid them. Yeah. They all have the same rate of fire, they get increased accuracy, and A1 onwards stabilizer, and the A2 even has stingers. Again, there's not always like a straight up right choice. They're all very good. Roland 2 would definitely see a lot of play if the Roland 3 didn't exist. Basically the same, but one less HE and less range. But still 65% accuracy. High availability as well. Less range as well, though. So, basically an OSA AK, if you will. But not wheeled. Roland 3 is the same, like on wheels. Not a huge fan, because it doesn't have any armor. So, when this becomes your in Landshot or DGC, for example, right? Your opening unit against helicopters, this can be a bit awkward because it just dies to rocket bots very fast. Lars is actually very funny. Lars has a very high rate of fire and fires its entire salvo. Lars 2 only fires half its salvo. But Lars 1 also doesn't have a high aim time that the Lars 2 has, and it reloads for a long time. Whereas the Lars 2 reloads relatively quickly, can smoke as well, and has I think a 15 seconds aim time. Lars 2 is just solid. It's not horrible, it's not amazing, it's just solid. And if the M270s or some other artillery options didn't exist, probably would be the go-to take here. But not much else really to say. It's a pretty solid MLRS. At close to minimum range, it would pretty consistently stun everything inside. Not necessarily panic. Keep in mind that you don't have to be panicked to get stunned. Yeah, and you just can't keep firing it because of its rate of fire as low reload time, especially if you have 2 out there. They're not the most expensive on the FOB either. Yeah, they're solid, more than solid. They're good. Yeah, Lars suited this. Last one, I ran this for a while because of its very high rate of fire, like between rockets and like 36 rockets. It's funny to run them. I think that is the Lars 1 also cheaper on supply. Let me double check. I think it is because it's lower HE. It is not a whole lot. It's 22 versus 24 per shot. But you can see shot rate of 2 seconds, right? In salvo length of 36, so very high rate of fire. The Mars is a cluster MLRS, but I'll be honest, pretty much any cluster MLRS that isn't the Smirch or the Attackams, or maybe the Yugoslav one, but the Yugoslav one has 30 seconds aim time. Not that great. It's still better than the East German BM27 though, so I think in team games it can be fine. You're usually still better off running the M270, the French one, because you can just stun like 5-6 shots and anything inside is gonna get stunned by its rockets, and you then get a second salvo ready to use on another part of the map. Just keep in mind, especially for 1 versus 1s, very high max range also means very high minimum range, which is why the Eurogun is actually kind of better, because 42 kilometers max range is just so much overkill. But it also means that you have an 8,400 meters minimum range. Like on Petty Field, for example, that is an issue, or in hell in a very small place. And if you look at the Eurogun, only 7 kilometers, and you definitely feel that on those maps. Or even if you are just in the minimum range, you might not want to be like that accurate because with the range scaling being a thing, right? Just keep that in mind. But not like you have another option in terms of HEMLRs. Well, you have the Lars too, I suppose. M109, as always, is a fun little spam, like low cost and low continued, like low supply cost artillery. It's an okay option. Again, usually see M110s, M270s, or the SSR, but M109 is not bad. And then you have this thing, which is basically the German counterpart of something like an AMX AUF1, but yeah. M110, it's fine. Issue is on larger maps, you actually have range problems, so keep that in mind. Nuclear winter is coming, or if you want to shoot at the base of Highway to Seoul, you will notice this. Not to mention team games. 5HE mortars, this one got nerfed for 35 points, but they're 5HE mortars. They're good 5HE mortars. What can I say? Basic 5HE, but that's good. And they come with a good amount of ammo. VDAA, your cheap non-radar spec, base defense, or if that's your only wield option for some reason, because you for some reason don't want to run the Crotal, your opening unit, I guess. You see it every now and then. By no means crucial, but it's not really bad. It's fine. Nothing special about this to mention, honestly. VRA Mistral. Again, one of those units that is actually very good. Like a mobile Mistral for 35 points. Very, very solid. It does only fire one missile at a time. Like before having to reload for 6 seconds. 6 seconds, presumably because they probably copied this over from the manpad, right? As opposed to using it based on vehicles where it's 5 seconds per missile, by the way, which is funny. It has no armor, of course, and only 5 HP, but it's wheeled and fast, and only 35 points, and you definitely don't need to upgrade it. But again, just hard to fit in, but at the same time also something that I think many other decks would love to have. I think US, for example, would kill for this. At least I would if I was US. Again, I think they kill for a lot of other stuff too. Thanks. AMX-13, I think the only AMX-13, like actually AMX-13 tank that is horrible, it's just bad. On the one hand, it still has that crazy burst rate of fire that all the other AMX-13s have, but only 2 HE. Little range, little accuracy, and no AP basically. A very slow. Actually, I don't think it's actually that slow being cycle loss, but like a low accuracy, low range. It's not. It's just not good. Okay, don't make me go into details. AMX and RCSB on the other hand, very good. Wheeled, 4 front armor. I don't know why I'm making gestures with my hand. Not like you can see me. 4 front armor, full range, 16 AP, 9 RPM, medium optics as well. Solid off-road speed, not as good as some other wheel tanks, but still solid. You even get this in, I think you get this in armored, right? Yeah, you do. It's just quite good. Nowadays you see it, or more reason to take it than South Africa is when the Recon version got nerfed. But this is a good, it's just good, right? It doesn't obviously have the optics of Recon units, but with medium optics, it can still oftentimes be good enough, and doesn't have the stealth either, but for openers and such, very, very good. Just keep in mind, you gotta be careful in your openers, or in general, but especially in the openers. It doesn't have a stabilizer, and since there isn't a fast attack move in this game, you gotta micro them a bit. Not too much, all you gotta do is just press stop or attack move, or right click on an enemy unit, but just obviously be aware, no stabilizer. The AMX-30 line. Alright. This one is not good. 30 points. 3 HE at this range is fine, 9 RPM, but only 6 armor, poor optics. At 9 AP, heat is probably better than kinetic, but it's still very bad. I think this could be 20 points at... Okay, I think that people would run it, but it probably wouldn't be crazy. It's just not very good. It won't survive a whole lot, it won't kill a whole lot. Like, you might think, oh, I can just buy a 4-stack and just kill super heavy with heat. In practice, this just very rarely works. Every now and then there will be a situation where, oh, it actually does end up working, but it is not a valid strat to go into a game with. And it doesn't work with this one either. And 30 points, like 120 points for a 4-stack that just gets basically killed by a single proper medium tank in many situations. Not even mentioning like in forest fights, right? You need 24 AP in forests. 24 AP kinetic to one-shot this, so an M1A2 will even one-shot this at max range. And to kill this, to one-shot this in forests, a full-range tank needs... Oh, now I have to do math. Well, okay. You get 11 AP. Okay, no, basically 13 AP. 13 AP kinetic tank with full range, or 13 or 14 AP at 2100 meters range, will one-shot you in the forest, and you will deal 1 damage, right? And that's the thing with spam tanks. That's why you usually want kinetic, because you're usually too squishy to like engage via the open ground, because that's where your medium and heavy tanks are gonna be, and your 80 gems. Then you will just get one-shot or double tapped or whatever, which means that you usually want to fight at close range, close to the infantry. And as such, kinetic scaling would go a long way. But with heat, that's just not a thing. obviously. Same issue here, 5 points for the autocannon is not worth it. Now you're kinetic, but the other issue is also you're stationary. You're stationary. You have no stabilizer. So forests are going to be awkward. If you could fire the autocannon at the same time, it would be a different story. Brennus can somewhat hold its weight, but again, no stabilizer is really annoying. 11 armor isn't that much. And I think it would need either a good chunk more armor or a good chunk more AP and just lose the other value, whichever you want to not have, to have a roll. But at this, it just doesn't. It can't punch up very well. It can't punch down very well either, because punching down usually means you're either shooting at IFVs, in which case, okay, whatever, you're kind of overkilling anyway, or you're shooting at Recon tanks, Recon vehicles, in which case you will probably get wrecked because you're not going to spot them. And with 11 armor, you easily punch. You can easily get penetrated. 32 and 40 are fine. Like, this is basically what I want, right? You lose 1 armor, but you get good chunk AP. Even the stabilizer. Much, much better tank in my eyes. Because, yes, you actually get killed more easily, but at least you can also just actually punch up more easily as well. Or get closer to the one-shot range, whatever you're punching down to, at the very least. And the 40 has just 2 extra armor, 1 more AP. 40 is fine. It's a bit glass cannony because it's still only 12 armor, so in forest you can't get one-shot by kinetic. But usually you just run a 2A1. They're not bad per se, but they're just mediocre, I think is the best way to put them. You just gotta be very careful with how you use them, because they're so easily just... And not even talking about side shots, right? 4 side armor, just so easily killed through the side. Like a Recon AMX-10 or a Recon P1 PSV sitting somewhere, side shot, bam, you're almost dead. Just keep that in mind. Hylar is similar story to the Brennus. On the one hand, it can actually punch down better because of the autocannon. So, like, if you're especially fighting in close range, your autocannon starts penetrating. So if your tank gun gets them down to 2 HP, the autocannon can often finish it off. It also has a 10 RPM with an autoloader. But at 70 points, only 15 AP. Not the best off-road speed and 12 armor. You get bullied by other tanks very quickly. If you had like 13 armor, you could like make some forest fight shenanigans, because you wouldn't be able to get a one-shot by kinetic in there anymore. But in practice, it's just not that great. In armored, you can definitely fit it in. It's like every now and then. It can basically be like an anti-spam tank with its autocannon inside and the high RPM, and it's fine for that. But it just struggles to basically deal with anything that isn't a tank, practically speaking. Yeah, unless you like outnumbered, but then when you're setting 140 points versus a 100-point tank, then you're kind of expecting to win, at least when you're fighting in close range anyway. M48's the cheap one is fine. It's a solid fire support tank, right? 5 armor, 8 RPM, 3 HE, decent range, acceptable speed, 50 cal is very nice to have. In armor, you're probably gonna run this. Other decks, probably not so much. It's fine. Nothing crazy, but a solid fire support tank. And the upgrade is actually a downgrade. Like, yes, you get the L7 now, which means you have a better gun and a slightly higher AoE as well. But high suppression, a bit more AP. But that's pretty much whatever, because against infantry you're almost as effective. Slightly more, because you presumably have a slightly bigger AoE, but who cares. Mobility armor is the same. And you trade the Browning for an MG3, which is a downgrade. So, you're... Although I guess, to be fair, the MG3 is the only vehicle-based 7.62mm MG, as far as I know, that has 30% accuracy instead of 20%. It's actually not that big of a downgrade. It's still a downgrade, though. Eclair, must have. Very good. Like 12 RPM autoloaded. Full stabilizer. Very fast. Good armor. Good AP. I guess it doesn't have the same armor or AP as, let's say, quote-unquote proper super heavies. And the 7-side armor does come into play every now and then. It means you do get one shot by spikes, for example, which are probably the most common 21 AP heat weapon you'll find. Which is the threshold to one shot 7 armor. But it's still like must have. It's very, very good. punches down incredibly well. Can punch up very well as well if you get close enough. At max range, you're gonna struggle against like Challenger 2s, M1A2s, Merkava 3D bases, and stuff like that. But at like anything below, I don't know, 2,000 meters or something, you're starting to win again because of your 12 RPM. So yeah, it's just very good. And of course, against anything that isn't super heavy, you will just murder them with the RPM as well. Losing one, let's say one armor to your 2A5, or maybe even two to a Challenger 2, easily worth getting the 3 RPM and the loader. And the AP loss, not nearly as big of a deal either. The armor is a much bigger deal than the AP loss. Like, surely, yes, there will be like ranges or units where 23 AP would suddenly allow you to one-shot them, right? But that is not that often the case. Not nearly as often as the 12 RPM comes into play, getting that second shot out much, much earlier, right? Leopard 1 and 2, it exists. It's not horrible per se. Like, 30 points again is a bit expensive for a fire support tank, but then when you compare to the AMX-30, you get 10 RPM, you get kinetic, you get a stabilizer, a better MG, a bit more speed. You do lose a range step, admittedly. That is not nothing. But having kinetic suddenly means that you're actually a threat to something like a Mortar 2 or CV90 appearing at close range or something like that, right? Or you might get a lucky side shot in force against a proper tank or stuff like that. With heat, you're always tickling things. You can't even one-shot one armor. I didn't even mention it, but not even able to one-shot a one armor transport. It's just sad. 104 does have a similar role to the T-72A. Not nearly as well because it only has 8 armor, but like medium optics and good range, and the 10 RPM means it's like solid on like low intensity flanks and such. It can spot well, it has good range, it's consistent, 10 RPM, and in a pinch, it's gonna be solid fire support. You just gotta be careful with its armor, as always. And of course, it won't be able to punch against medium tanks because 12 AP is not a lot. 1A5 can be an okay tank. In Moto, you're gonna run this because you don't have much else to run. You're not gonna use it a whole lot, but you're probably gonna run it because you presumably will have the activation points. Maybe not if you only run the AMX-10 RCSP. Either way, it's okay. Reasonably fast. RPM of 10, 16 AP. It has armor, not a whole lot, but it has armor. But yeah, it's fine. And having a stabilizer at least and the extra RPM is gonna be nice. Leopard 2 is just lacking something. It's not bad per se. It's probably the optics. If it had medium optics, you might see it a lot more. Well, a lot more compared to how often you see it now. You probably still wouldn't see it a whole lot in general, but it's the main thing. I think once you get into like the 80-point medium tank category, you want the medium optics. Being able to, like at 1500 meters or something, spot if a Recon tank is gonna shoot at you, so crucial. Or in general, something from force shoots at you, it doesn't even have to be a Recon unit. So important. And while, yes, you basically always want Recon around or at least some infantry to support, in practice, there will always be angles where you get shot at where the infantry squad that's running with you doesn't have line of sight because it's a bit further forward and suddenly there's something else blocking line of sight, or a bit behind, or etc. etc. In practice, having medium optics on a tank is still very valuable, even if in theory should or even do have support units around with better optics. That's just how it is, right? And that's probably its biggest weakness. The next biggest weakness is having only 5 side armor for 80 points. That's not a whole lot. It can also be annoying. And in general, it doesn't... okay, 15 armor for 80 points isn't horrible. I mean, it's not the 17 armor of an M1 IP, for example. But it's fine. It's reasonably tanky. With 16 AP, it doesn't punch up very well at max range. And in force, then it's a fine tank. It's a fine. I think in armor, maybe you run it. And then if you, like, throughout the game, if you're playing against like a Motor deck or a certain deck, then maybe that Leopard 2 is like a perfect tank because the 20 extra points of a 2A1 is not going to give you anything of value. And then getting an extra Leopard 2 for every couple of tanks you get is a lot more valuable suddenly, right? There's reasons and then, to run that. But in general, if you're building an all-purpose deck, 2A1 is probably your go-to choice. More armor, more AP, medium optics. It's a reasonable upgrade. It's, again, I think just like the entire Leopard 2 line, there's basically nothing fancy about any of the Leopard 2s. But maybe with the exception of the base Leopard 2, none of them are like bad in either. Like, they're neither like great in anything, but they're not really horrible at anything either. They're pretty much solid or good at more or less any category, right? Don't have the infantry DPS output or something like a 4HE tank, but they have the accuracy and they have 9 RPM and not 8 or 7 like a Challenger. They have good speed, unlike a Challenger. They have good autonomy, unlike the Turbine M1 tanks. They have solid armor, but not great armor. They have full range, unlike the M1 IP, for example. They have solid AP, etc., etc. Right? Nothing they have is outstanding, either good or bad, right? Which, yeah, it's fine. That's just not shiny. I think the 2A4 is probably the best out of the Leopard 2 line. I like to say that the Leopard 2A5 is the worst super heavy of the game, but it's still a super heavy, right? Why do I say that? That's maybe a bit like much, but that doesn't mean it's by any means a bad unit, by the way. Right? But for example, the Leclerc, obviously 12 RPM, 75 km/h speed, right? Crazy good, even if you lose 1 AP and 1 armor and some side armor, right? But just in general, if I had to choose between, I would always go for the Leclerc. M1A2 has extra AP. Jager 2 has 23 armor instead of the 23 AP, and is, in my opinion, much better stat line. The T90 lines have all loaders and 4HE, for example, and the BU has a sphere. The ADUM is much faster and also has an all loader and the missile. The Moderna is worse, but it's 3 per card. M1 mod is worse, but it's 3 per card. And sometimes just being a super heavy is enough. And that's also the case with the 2A5. Again, me saying it's the worst super heavy does by no mean it's like a bad unit or anything like that, right? It's just that if I had all the super heavies available, in most scenarios, it would probably the last one I'd choose from. But that is at the same time, maybe that's just me. It does have better speed compared to the T90, for example. So, maybe I should value the 2A5 over the T90. Over the speed over the T90's outloader on N4G. It's a very valid comment. And better stabilizer as well and accuracy. So it's not like an objective measurement, what I'm saying. It's personal opinion. But back to the 2-4. 2-4 is, in my opinion, the best Leopard 2 because for its price, it has a very good stat line. 19 armor means you do not get double tapped by 26 AP, which, for example, is the Maverick on the Peace Rhine, or on the Peace Pheasant, or on an A10 Thunderbolt, or a Longbow. 19 AP is exactly the AP you would need to get to 30 AP through scaling in forests, right? So very good stat line. Like, it hits 2 very good breakpoints. Is affordable. Doesn't suddenly value one, and it's very like that doesn't go for every price point, right? I think the lower you go with your price, the more you might want to weigh 1 AP over armor to a certain extent at least. But at 130 points, 19 AP, 19 armor, it's very good that it's not going like the K1A1, 22 AP but only 18 armor, right? You go way harder in AP, but it's actually pretty bad. But then maybe going 22 armor and 18 AP might be bad in other situations, although it would actually be a very sick stat line, I'll be honest. But out of all the tanks in this price range, it has a very good stat line. It being like 19 AP, 19 armor is just very good. That's just, yeah, it's a very good tank. And solid availability with 5 per card as well. And like has the other stats of the Leopard 2s, right? Good speed, good autonomy, right? Would love to have it. Recon, arguably the strongest. It depends on the situation, but in certain situations, maybe the strongest tab of the game. And the reason why Moto is so good with this thing. Otherwise, it's just a basic, very good optics. That's fine. Also, although it's a bit slow, right? AML-90 is 8 AP heat, no stabilizer, 7 RPM. It's just not very good. AMX-10 got the nerf hammer back in 2021. Feels like it was yesterday. From 30 to 40 points. People were crying. Good. But no, the unit is still good. It's just not you gotta take 2 cards of this anymore, right? I would still run it. Nowadays you can definitely afford to up with it because it's 40 points now. Can't spam it as much. It's still good. It's still wheeled with a good range. 3 AP kinetic gun. Sorry, 3 armor kinetic gun, right? It is still quite strong. It will still one-shot KTs. It will still win against BTR ADAs, assuming you make sure you're not fighting in forests and stuff like that, right? It is still a good tank. Actually, no, in forest it would win against BTR ADAs because it would just one-shot them. But like I say, 500 meters range or something like that. Yeah, it's still a very good recon unit. Very fast, stealth optics, kinetic gun, good range. It can fire at a long distance with 9 RPM and 3 AG as well. It's good fire support if it needs to be. Yeah. AMX-30 got nerfed with Italy, 5 points extra. Still quite solid. Yes, it only needs 80 AP heat, but it also fires like a... I mean, in case you don't know, the AMX-13s, it goes for all of the AMX-13s. The tanks, at least, not the artillery. That's the one. Start length of 12 and a shot reload of 3. The 13 RP is... Sorry, 13 RP rounds per minute, while not incorrect, is somewhat misrepresentative. Because practically speaking, you're rarely gonna use more than 12 shots in a row, like in a short time. But even if you do, right, you fire those 12 shots with 20 RPM, right? Which is crazy, especially when you consider you do have like full 3 HE. The burst of this unit is very high. It doesn't have the range, but it does have stealth to make up for it, and 3 armor is not too bad. And in this case, it doesn't happen often. It still doesn't happen often. It's still not a strategy you should follow. But this might be one of the situations where the heat might actually, like, you know, tickle down a tank. Maybe not from full HP, but like from 3 HP, because those three shots will come out very fast, right? It's very, very good still, despite on paper it might not look very much, but the optics and stealth help a lot with survivability, and it's also like in general its versatility. It's gonna survive more because it's spotted harder. It can spot more, thus it can engage more targets and does do more in general for you, right? It's a very good unit, and honestly, you can definitely consider. I'm not saying you should. You can consider just running 2 of this and using this as your main fire support unit. And people have done that before, effectively. It's very strong. It still is. BGS, same issue as Grenzer. The only one of 2 recon squads that only has good stealth as opposed to very good or exceptional when it comes to 2-man squads, which means they're a lot easier to spot. Combine it with the fact that they're militia, meaning they're very, very slow, obviously horrible at fighting everything or anything. So that is their downside. The upside is they spot just as well as any other recon squad in the game. So if they're sitting in the same building, they will spot just as well as your Fanspeer will. They might not identify units as fast, right? Keep in mind the plus 20% more chances to see and identify enemy units only counts for identifying, meaning whether you're gonna spot something with a label or like with a blank label or with a name, right? That's the only difference between the veterancy. And sometimes you actually do notice that when you use them a lot, you notice that they will spot a lot of stuff without identifying them. Although I'm not an expert, but I think it depends on the distance where you spot them, whether you identify them or not. Either way, that is the upside, right? They're very cheap, they spot just as well once in position. But obviously repositioning them is gonna take much longer, / is impossible because they maybe will get spotted immediately and killed. Yeah, it's up to you, but I'm not a huge fan of them. But there's definitely a strat where you just spam them with the Jupiter, right? It's cheap, it's 150 km road speed. Just get 4 of them in the opener for 60 points. You can spot a lot if they get into position, right? It's just in Eurocorps, it's also like it's a very contested tab, the Recon tab, right? Because your fire support, like your direct fire support, is not that great in this deck. Outside of the AMX-3090, will rely a lot more on this if you run it. So, minus powder. I'd argue, yeah, probably the best shock we can spot in the game. It has the best AT out of any. No, it doesn't. The Liren have better AT, but the Liren also have only, I think, 40% accuracy as opposed to 60% on the Commando Spada. Battle Rifle is good, only basic MG, but the weaponry for Recon Squad is quite good, and solid transports. VAP T20 is good, even the base VAP is fine. Team Up Pirate sometimes. It's not a great transport, but it has an autocannon, so your opponent can't really ignore it if it decides to fly around. Yeah. Fair and Speer is your 2-man sniper squad. Because the cannon is incredibly good. It's cheap, it's fast, and again, your opponent can't ignore it. The autocannon means that, especially if they have a GPCV, they can't allow it to just run through, right? Like, depending on what you run, you might just allow it to do that and just eventually run into whatever you have sitting in its path that will kill it or something, or the plane is reloading and you can't easily afford to just, wait until it's reloaded to kill it. But with an autocannon, if there's anything that has light armor, it is always gonna be a threat if it is around. Even if it's a low threat, it is a threat that can, with one salvo, just kill a GPCV, right? And of course, being very fast and very cheap means you can just suicide it into the opener, or into the opponent in the opener to immediately essentially know what's up, right? Very low cost, very versatile as well, even throughout the game. Good optics isn't crazy good, but like it allows you to spot pretty well throughout the open field. It allows you to spot like on flanks, like as flank protection, stuff like that. Very, very good. Hussards are just pretty. that is very funny. Hussards might be the worst line, like regular Recon squad in the game. Although to be fair, that might also go towards the Israeli Recon squad, for example, that doesn't even have any AT weapon. But at the same time, the Hussars 85 are probably the best line Recon squad in the game, because I'm pretty sure that the only regular Recon squad that has an AT of like more than 15 AP. Which is actually funny. They're actually very, very good for regular Recon squads, but Commando Sparta exists, so nobody uses them. That's really the whole story. They're good, like great in fact, but these guys exist, so why run them? That's generally how it is. GPCV, somebody likes, and VBL is a glorified GPCV. VBL Mistral is good, but again, like what does it do? It kills helicopters and planes. In fact, it does it actually pretty decently, right? Again, a Mistral, but it has a. Despite having to reload for 2 seconds, sorry, 6 seconds, actually fires them in a burst of 2. You're kind of messed up here. Fires them in a burst of 2 with a perfect stabilizer as well. Optic stealth. And good off-road speed. So that is actually very good. In practice, once again, hard to fit in, because what it does is, yes, it kills aerial units, just like your Cortal, and in many situations worse. So like, why pay 5 points, like, why not pay 5 points more for Cortal? On the other hand, it carries more ammo. It has additional utility of spotting stuff, although it's still like a vehicle to spot, with like, so it's not that great at spotting because you can't get close as infantry, blah blah blah. But it's a good unit. Where it will, however, excel is at killing Tigers and a K-52 and a Ninja, because the stealth on helicopters is counteracted by ground optics, not air detection. In case you still don't know that. I say that almost every time, although I haven't run the Tiger in a while. But that is very important to know. The stealth on your Tiger is not counteracted by air detection. It's counteracted by ground optics, right? Which is why your Tiger can just shoot at an automatic, and the automatic just will see a missile out of nowhere coming towards it, right? And in that scenario, the VBL Mistral is basically the best unit to kill a Tiger. That said, it takes up one of your valuable recon slots. So unless you're playing Moto, again, hard to fit in. But not a bad unit to fit in either. Tiger, of course, it has stealth. Jack of all trades, but master of none. You just gotta be a bit careful with its hot twos. I would always recommend to turn off the hot twos, maybe even the snap, until you actively use the Tiger, because it can easily just waste its ground-based payload. Stinger is whatever, because you probably want to kill whatever helicopter is in range either way, because you're gonna get spotted either way by the helicopters that are gonna be close to you, and you don't want to be too late with turning on the stingers when there's like an enemy helicopter with weaponry suddenly coming towards you, right? Snap and hot 2, you just want to be careful because you run out so quickly. That is said, of course, if you're trying to go for a Hail Mary, like around the flanks, vehicle or something, maybe you don't want to turn him off, because if you don't know what is there, you might die very fast, so you might want to get as much payload out before you die. So, yeah. Just, depending on how you use it, you might want to be careful because of its very low payload. The sniper is also kind of whatever. It's mainly the HOTS, because it's mainly like a tank killer, which is, also in the same. PAH is, I'm pretty sure, Panzer Abwehr Helicopter. which means anti-tank helicopter. Sonderwagen. It's very Sonder indeed. Sonder in German is German for special. Yeah, it's just bad. Looks is fine. 2 armor is solid. Like on wheels is always good to have on something that actually fights, or in general for survivability, right? It's really gonna struggle at long ranges against other autocannons or similar vehicles. You don't want to engage like your BTR-80A at max range or something like that. So that's the biggest issue of this, because on the one hand, right, your recon units, especially when firing from bushes and thus making the most out of your stealth, i.e., trying to stay undetected, want to fight at as long of a distance as possible. On the other hand, the RH-202 is one of the most short-range autocannons in the game that benefits the most from firing at very short distances. So that, on the one hand, kind of goes against it, which means that it doesn't have it's not as versatile as something like a Hachinana or BRDM3, let alone an AMX-10, of course. Which does not mean it's bad by any means, right? It's still gonna be good at sneaking around and trying to like find CVs or anything behind the lines and kill them at relatively close distance. It's just that it's gonna struggle against other like autocannon vehicles again, unless you like ambush them or something. A1 is gonna be better because it has more accuracy, but still only 2 AP. Most later versions of autocannons also gain an additional AP, not the RH-202. It would probably be busted a bit if this got 3 AP. Then again, the late version is mostly found on more expensive units anyway, so Kurz, it's actually not horrible, but only 1 armor. Still gets the HSO 820, which is the same autocannon you find on the Kyla and the American MBT-70, which has the same rate of fire as the RH-202, but less accuracy and stabilizer. But it's actually not horrible for 15 points, but it's also only 1 armor. It's not the best speed, so it doesn't really do much either, because it's so squishy and has to be so close, like even closer than it looks, right? Because of its lower accuracy. So Leopard 1, the Recon 1 is actually fine, but it has the same range as the AMX-13, right? It has 2 more armor, but it has practically half the rate of fire. The same HE. HE usually matters more. And okay, to be fair, I was gonna say most of the time both will need 2 shots to kill something. To be fair, the AMX-13 will start to need 3 shots at least from 3 armor onwards. No, hold on, even 2 armor needs 3 shots. Sorry, it will almost always need more shots than a Leopard 1, admittedly. But especially the HE output is just so much better on this. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's still a good Recon tank. Like cheap, spammable, and decent like DPS. And then with the Razzmann, which I know I've seen people use it. These units are horrible. I'm sorry. Low availability, high cost, easily spottable, and because you have to keep them that much further back so they stay unspotted, they don't spot as well as Recon Infantry anyway. AMX-10 Milan. Vehicle type, by the way, one of the worst vehicle types in the game out of all the coalitions. One of the few vehicles that can fire autocannon and missile at the same time. It's nothing crazy though. AMX-30 is just a hot carrier, fires 4 in a row. It has like good missiles, good armor and such, so it's really not horrible for 40 points, honestly. It's not it is no Polo, that is for sure. But it's still pretty solid. Sagaye, you see it every now and then, like in Mech or Moto. That's like a cheap wheeled gun, but it only has 1 armor. But good range and accuracy, and even like the gun itself is actually pretty solid, honestly, for the price. And the fact that it's on wheels. I mean, maybe I've been too harsh on you. Maybe you're actually pretty good in mech. But at least outside of mech, it's not a very good unit. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, I think it was the last video on Highway to Seoul, where this actually did pretty solid versus me when it was played in Lancet mech. The thing with Jeeps is you want long-range ATGMs on them, if you're on ATGMs. They're so squishy that you just want to stay out of anti-tank range. And if your missile isn't particularly fast and doesn't particularly outrange tank guns very well, it's very easy to deal with you. I mean, even easier than it already is, right? So Milan Jeeps just, I mean, they're not horrible, but they're just usually not gonna do that much for you. Kanoniak Panzer. It has 12 RPM, manually loaded, with 3 HE, but it does have a turret or a stabilizer. Not the best accuracy either. It's heat, which isn't that great. It's not gonna do too much. The VTS-1, not the best fire support vehicle, but it's like pretty good, like anti-tank kind of in a sense. Not necessarily anti-super heavy or something like that, but 15 AP at good range for 25 points kinetic is very strong. You can spam that, and in close ranges, they're gonna just murder any vehicle. It's very burst damagey though, so you gotta be careful with its 6 RPM. But it's a fun little unit. A Regulus Rifle Jeep is a Regulus Rifle Jeep. Milan Jeeps, Mephisto. I'd probably prefer the AMX because it can actually tank some. But the Vab is still fine. Like, it's fast. You just gotta be careful that any tank is gonna one-shot you. These are not very good. Very slow missiles that don't do anything. Jager 1. I mean, I'd prefer the AMX. Especially because of its salvo, right? It fires 4 in one salvo before having the real 20 seconds. This fires 1. Jaguar 2, if it had a better salvo, like also 4 or at least 2, I think it would be pretty decent because it's gonna be a lot more consistent with its extra accuracy. 2 AP, while they are nice, I think you would usually use something like a Jaguar 2 mostly against like IFVs and such, or like Recon vehicles if they're trying to move between bushes or something. And with 3 armor and medium optics, actually pretty solid at that role. If it wasn't for having to reload after every missile. This is basically just base defense. It has such low autonomy that that's all it can do. And it's fine at that. 1 armor is not going to survive much, but it's very cheap. It's a solid autocannon, so it's good at that. With the 122, it's just... If it had good autonomy, it would be solid, I think. But, yeah. You need this at the front, you need to move around, like... And you can't do this with 200 kilometers autonomy. Your off-road speed can still be 75 if... Yeah, with that autonomy, it's just awkward to use. That's a solid, like, dedicated anti-helicopter helicopter. If all you need is like to shoot down enemy armed helicopters that aren't carrying missiles themselves, this might be one of the best options you have. But you probably still want to go for the Celtic instead if you want to have an anti-helicopter, because missiles are so much better and you're so much faster as well. So yeah. Both, they're fine, but you're probably better using... I think Gazelles are better because they're much faster. Even if you carry fewer missiles. And this one is 10 points cheaper. Like 40 points, it's a really good unit in general, by the way. Right. Very good, very underrated. Cassiope is incredibly good. A turreted autocannon with 3 AP and very good accuracy and solid rate of fire. It's pretty busted and like actually very strong. Offensively, defensively, base defense, flank defense, cheesing around. It can't do anything, really. Tigers share the same stealth as a Recon type. The German Recon Tiger. The Eternal Boner Gun. They're both good. Not only for the stealth, but as solid weaponry. They have the same gun as the Cassiope, which is a very good gun. Rocket pods are good. Mistras are good. Hot 2s are good. Yeah, if you want like a high-end anti-tank helicopter, it's a solid option. If you want a high-end anti-air helicopter, that's a solid option. And the good thing with the Tiger Hab is, even if you use up its Mistral, or there's nothing to kill with its Mistrals, the snaps and the Giat still come into play, right? And with its stealth and optics, it's harder to kill. It's gonna be like a glorified, like a rocket bot helicopter in a sense, if you don't get value out of the Mistrals, but it's not gonna be useless, is what I'm saying. Planes. Alpha Jet. If it was 900 kmh, it might be decent, but not like this. It's slow, no ECM, very small payload. At Dart, kind of a similar story. Slow, low ECM, low payload. Although don't underestimate the Twin Defa. It's the same rate of fire as a Vulcan. So the gun is actually quite good. And this sort of makes it a decent Helo Hunter. Because of its low speed, it can fire its gun for a good while, so... Two-Weapon Dart is an okay anti-tank killer, it's just that it's semi-active, right? Which makes it struggle a bit every now and then. It's not the fastest, and it's gonna fly relatively low, so somewhat easy to kill as well. But 30% ECM is fine. F4F. Like if you want like a cheap Kilo Hunter, I guess that can be an option. Not the worst plane out there. Fast, has ECM, has missiles. Yeah. KWS, probably the best ASF card in the game. Veteran AIM-120s, there's 2 per card, 3 of them as well, not just 2. Is very strong. Very, very strong. Yeah. Good gun. Solid sidewinders. It needs to be said that, of course, if only one of each of your missiles hit, the plane would be at 1 HP. So you'd need to be able to not get killed before your gun can finish it off if you're fighting head on. That said, being able to fire 3 of those off in an engagement at veteran, as opposed to 2 when looking at something like the East German MiG-29, which also I think only comes at hardened as well. No, it also comes at veteran. Still, very, very big deal. Very big deal. Peace Shrine is solid. It's affordable. It can helo hunt decently. It will consistently kill medium tanks and such. Obviously, it's not going to be able to kill super heavies or even heavies from full HP up front. But it's affordable, it's fast, it has multi-role capabilities. Crusader is your other potential option for a helo hunter. Better missiles, but no ECM. Worse gun. Yeah. Probably still the F4F, but I run neither personally. Jager is your cheap seed option. It has no stealth, but good missile, decent missiles. It's like a Su-24, really. Although the Su-24, while it has only 20% ECM, has medium stealth. Which one is better? I'll leave it up to you. I'd probably prefer the Su-24. But then again, like having the extra ECM is really nice. But it's a fine, cheap seaplane. If you run this, I would consider downwetting it to get a second one. I think if you're upwetting it, you're probably better off running the ECR. Mirage F1C, not a horrible ASF, honestly. 3 hardened. If it was 3 veteran, I think it would be much obviously it would be stronger, but I think it would be a much bigger contender to actually be used. But even outside that, right, they have decent base accuracy on a missile. Twin Defa is good. Speed is good. ECM is acceptable. And at 90 points, a 3 per card, even if it's not veteran or elite, by no means bad. And 2 of each missile, right? There's planes at this price range that only get 1 medium range missile, which is bad, but you're gonna get 2. This is actually also quite a strong ASF. 2 on elite. Solid sets of missiles. 30% ECM. This one as well. This one used to be run a lot before the KWS got its veterancy buff. You saw this all the time for Eurocorps. You still see it frequently because despite the KWS, I say despite, but it's still a very good ASF card. 2 on elite with 40% ECM at 120 points. That's a lot of ECM you get for the price. It doesn't have the same killing power, of course, as maybe some other planes at 120 points, like the Block 15. It has 5 and 6 HE on its missiles. And I think 60% accuracy on the short-range missiles as well. But still very, very, very good ASF. The second best napalm plane for Blue 4. And it's still not that great. It has a good payload, and it's fast, but it has no ECM. Why do napalm planes always have horrible ECM or horrible payload, or both? There's one plane that has both. It's the freaking American Phantom. No other napalm plane has both. I hate it. Mirage 5F. Actually kind of okay. Bombs aren't the best, but there are 8 of them at least. It's fast, it's somewhat affordable, and it's 3 per card. You probably, if you really want an HE bomber, which Eurocorps doesn't have good ones, you probably want the IDS, but with the availability buff, the Mirage 5F is at least a decent option now. Not a great one, but a decent one. F1CT, definitely one of the best cluster bombs better cluster bombers in the game. Only carries 6, but they have 7 AP and not 6, like many other ones out there. Good ECM, good speed, multi-role capabilities. A bit underrated, I think. A bit underrated. I think it even got a price buff. Rafale, the best, like, ASF in the game, like the strongest. It has stealth, 50% ECM, and 65% base accuracy instead of 60, which all other high-end missiles have. Except for the Python 3, whatever the Israeli high-end ASFs use. Although one thing to keep in mind is that the Mikas are actually a tad slower than missiles. I think most anti-air missiles on planes are, I presume, standardized. I didn't check it for a long time, but I think they are. But if you compare the Mika IR, like the short-range missile, with the AIM-9M, the other short-range missile, I'm gonna see. Wait, no, I'm stupid. They're faster, not slower. Wait, in the EM? Okay, no. The EMs are slower. The EMs are, well, kind of slower. They have a lower maximum speed. Wait, the short-range ones are actually faster? I mean, they don't come out faster. I think the accel speed, although the starting speed is how much they accelerate, or like how much they accelerate per tick or something like that. But I didn't realize they have a higher maximum speed. But I think in practice, I think the EMs are slower than the AIM-120s, if I remember correctly. Unless you fire like if the third one comes out and the head-on fire at a low distance, I think then it might hit faster. But okay, well, it shows what I know. What about I'm pretty sure every other missile is pretty much the same in terms of short range. And wait, what? No, yeah, that's the same as the AIM-9M, right? And then, yeah, I think pretty much every other missile has the same stats, more or less. But at least the EMs are, I think, in practice most of the time a bit slower. Especially, and you will notice this when, well, notice is maybe a harsh word, because, but that might come into effect, let's say, when you're shooting at planes that are evacuating or flying away from you, right? Then having when the missile flies much longer, than having the much lower maximum CV will come into effect. But yeah, the only ASF with stealth, unless you count the MiG-29M or the Block 52D, the South Korean seaplane. Whether or not it deserves it is a whole different discussion, but yeah. You can definitely, if you want to go for it, you can also just run 2 guts up with it. In team games might make sense, but I think you're leaving a lot of value on the table if you do not run a KWS in your deck, right? I think this is Eurocorps might have some of the most actual like must-take units, as in pretty much, and by that I mean pretty much no matter what deck you run, you should pretty much always take them, right? Like there is some I'm not saying they're like good or common arguments, but for a lot of units that decks always take, there might be, if they were available in other decks, arguments for not taking them. I think something like a Legion 90 or a Kutal or a KWS, I think no matter which deck they'd be available in, I'd find it tough to come up with a reason to not always take them when available. And Eurocorps might have, or has at least now it feels like it, quite a lot of those units. And with these 3, and that feels a lot to me at least. But I don't know, maybe, whatever. ECR, it's just a solid seaplane. It's a bit like the 2A5. I wouldn't ever say this is like, out of all the seaplanes, this is the worst seaplanes, but it's not flashy. Or like a Leopard 2 in general, I think, is a DC ECR, right? It's by no means flashy. It does its job, and it does its job well. It has 50% ECM, the highest end seat missiles you get, AIM-9Ls. It doesn't have the extra stealth or ECM that the Raven has, or the AIM-120s that the Block 52D has of South Korea, but it still has 50% ECM and the high-end missiles, seat missiles. What else do you really want, right? And then the IDS, which is an okay bomber. It's reasonable survivability, okay payload, some multi-role capabilities, and it's somewhat affordable, right? It's fine. That definitely is a reason, like an argument to run it, especially in 1v1s, just because like HE bombers like this will end up giving you capabilities to if it comes down to it, snipe high value targets. Sometimes that's the only way to somewhat quickly get rid of a CV that is in your own 2-pointer or something, or like in a contested 2-pointer, and then just having the option available, even if it for general purpose bombing is not a good option. Just having it for that scenario available can be very, very valuable, right? So yeah. Either way, that's Eurocorps. And that's gonna be the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.